One of the things we talked about last week was we were trying to expand our view and our definition of what missions is. It's not just for professionals who go to faraway places to preach the gospel, although that it is that in part. And it's not just, for regular people who go on mission trips, somewhere else. Also, it is that, but it's not only that. We talked about how it's each of us is invited to be a foretaste of what God's kingdom is, to show healing and reconciliation and love to all of his creation, wherever he's placed us, whatever situation we're in, wherever we are physically, wherever we are emotionally or financially, he's asking us right where we are to use what we have for his glory. And we talked about this verse from 1 Corinthians that says, therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord, your labor is not in vain. The idea that if we are working for the Lord and in the Lord, anything we do, no matter how small, local, global, sexy, not sexy, that whatever it is, if it's in the Lord, that God honors it and God values it. And we should too. We need to value everything that we do. So that was last week. You had some assignments that we talked about and that I emailed out on the following day. So we're going to break into small groups now, just for 15 minutes. And we're going to consider the questions that we had in our assignments last week. I've put up a PDF in the chat box in case you don't remember what the questions were, that detail what the questions were. So David is going to break us into small groups. And then after 15 minutes, we're going to be called back to come to the large group. And I'm just going to remind you that you'll see a little message that says, what you want to click on is you want to rejoin the main meeting. You don't want to exit, because if you exit, you're gone. So if it says rejoin, that's what you want to do. We're going to come back, and then we're going to hear a teaching from Heather about how to listen to other people. This is a really important thing. Let me just preface this by saying this, because no matter what we do, whether we're connecting with our neighbors, people we already know, people we don't know, it's a very important skill. How do you form bonds and relationships with people? When you serve people, it should come out of relationship. When you talk to people about your faith, it's most effective when it's in the context of relationship. And, relationships are based on listening. So I'm really looking forward to that after our breakout groups. So the questions were this, in case you've forgotten. What do you believe you have to offer? How might God be asking you to use those gifts? And the third thing was, to commit to meeting one need this week. So we're going to break into groups. We're going to see how we did, and we're going to come back together.
Well, so I want to just kind of put you in the mindset of where we are, and to say why this skill is so important. Before COVID, okay, back in the day, if you can put yourself back a year ago, our country was dealing with high levels of isolation, anxiety, and depression. People were feeling disconnected. Social media, particularly for young people, was causing this FOMO, fear of missing out. It was causing much more bullying. Now it was just a click away, 24/7. And a lot more reasons to compare oneself to others and feel they're they don't measure up. Add COVID to the equation. And what we're dealing with as a society is all of these issues being exacerbated on the mental health front. You've got rising anxiety, rising isolation, huge increase in suicidal thoughts or actions, and particularly in younger adults and teens. Add to that social distancing, staying at home, avoiding people, or you might get or give a life-threatening virus, and isolation is everywhere. in the midst of that, we're all asking the question, how do we stay connected? How do we overcome the disconnection we were already dealing with before COVID? Well, I want to tell you, and I think some of that disconnection is part of why our politics have gotten so inflammatory, and there's so much more division, it feels like, than there ever was before. So with that in mind, I think we have a solution in our faith for how to do that. And I want to go back to where it all started for us as humans, and that is in the garden. What happened when God created humans? He said, let us make them in our image. Right from the very beginning, humans were created in the image of God. And what do we know about the image of God? We know that the image of God is a triune God, a 3-in-1 God, God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and that they, in their oneness and threeness, are eternally in a beautiful, loving, reciprocal dance. There's this beautiful, they call it perichoresis, that's going on between the Godhead that is full of love and mutuality and reciprocity. Beautiful, mutual, equal loving, giving and receiving and giving and receiving. And that's the image that humans were made in. So we're designed for that kind of relationship, not only with God, and certainly Jesus opened the way for that to happen, but we're actually created to do that with one another. And we know that because Nathan's gonna, I think he's said this, or he might in an upcoming sermon, it is not good for man to be alone, right? With Adam. So we were designed for horizontal relationships and vertical ones because we're made in God's image. The power of relationships is in our DNA by God's divine design. That's how we're created. So with that in mind, with understanding the importance and power of relationship, what I want to say to you is, now let me go for more of the therapeutic angle. So we know theologically there's reason for relationship. Now emotionally, what many theorists are talking about is the importance of our attachment to one another, our ability to make connections with people. It's as important for an infant with a caregiver, and we've all heard about children's attachment and attachment styles, attachment issues, but it's a reality that we need from the cradle to the grave. Our whole life long, we need relationships. We need to be attached to others. And what's been found in neuroscience, I love this stuff. They found that the brain and the way the brain develops is more like a catcher's mitt. You know, those big mitts the catcher has, designed to grab that ball. So our brains are designed to catch relationships with others. We learn, our brain is growing in all different areas based on our interaction with other people. They are the ball we're catching, and we're throwing it back and forth. So mirror neurons, all the things that are happening in our brain are a result of our interconnectedness with one another. I find that stuff pretty exciting. And there are lots of different experiments they've done to show and prove that these attachment ideas are not just sort of a pie in the sky concept, but they actually have real physiological effects on our body, on our mind, on our heart. What can happen with good connection when you're connected to someone you love, and it could even be your pet, it certainly could be God, the most important relationship of all, but when we're connected to someone we love, it calms our nervous system, it helps us stay healthy, to live longer, to be more resilient, and even to feel less pain, physical pain. Certainly we could argue emotional pain as well. Often for people that we're interacting with on a daily basis, they may be a little guarded, they may have their defenses up, because very often harm comes in relationship. So it makes sense that healing has to take place in redemptive relationships. And what do we need in a relationship? Probably the most important thing we can give as an act of love is to listen, to really hear someone else, not just the surface words that they're saying, but the heart stuff underneath. And it is a sacrificial thing to listen like that. Let me read you a few verses. We actually read this, David, I was going to use it anyway. We read this in a staff prayer time this week, James 1:19. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. It goes on in verse 25 to say, bridle your tongue. Be quick to listen, slow to speak. You may know the word listen appears in the Bible over 1,500 times. Listen. And it's the most frequently voiced complaint in the Bible is that the people don't listen. I love that comment. That was biblical scholar Scott Knight pointed that out. We have a radical concept in our Jewish and Christian faith. We believe in a God, both in the Old Testament and the New, a God who listens to his people. This is not what other gods do. They don't listen to their people. They tell them what to do, right? They're not there to listen to their people. We know the psalmist says, I'm inclining, God, please incline to me and hear my cry. So what we start to discover, since God is love, is that listening is where we love out of, because we can listen because we're listening out of love. And that's what God does for us. So it's certainly what we need. It's what I spend a lot of time on with the care ministers here at church. A few of you are here, so you've heard some of this before. It's what we learn when we were studying to be therapists and what we learn to be pastors. These are critical gifts, critical abilities. Some of you are in Journey Mates, which is a contemplative women's group. And one of their foundational teachings is that in the small groups, we have 3 ways of listening. One is listening to God, listening to ourselves, and listening to others. So you can put them in other orders depending on what your goals are and what you're trying to accomplish. But those 3 areas, listening to God, ourselves, and others, are critical because they help us discern God's spirit and his direction, and also speak words of life to people because we're listening for the Holy Spirit's guidance. So when you sort of are stepping into listen, you're really offering the ministry of presence. That means you're coming into the room, being present to the other person and what their needs are. What's going on for them? How can we be of help to them? And that ministry of presence is powerful. I went from being a seminary professor to a chaplain in long-term care facilities. I read a lot of books. I used to quote important people, and I even wrote a few books. And I got to the nursing home. They couldn't care less what books I wrote. They couldn't care less what books I read. And they certainly would fall asleep much faster if I started quoting theology or the biblical scholars. And I realized they didn't care about any of that. What they wanted to know was I kind? Was I listening? Would I hold their hand? Was I there? Just present. It didn't matter any of the fancy stuff. You know, I could have done backflips. That wasn't as important as, did I smile? Did I take their hand? Could we just be together? So they taught me a whole lot about what it means to be with someone. What is that stuff when we strip away all the rest? What is the really important stuff that's remaining? And that's really what we want, isn't it? If you think about somebody in your life who's listened well to you, do you remember feeling, you can probably feel it inside, that what it was like to be in their presence? Did something in you go, right? Sort of feel warm, feel relaxed, feel at peace, being surprised. Somebody took a real interest in you. It makes you smile, doesn't it? To remember that person or that situation where you really felt they heard you. They maybe even heard things you didn't know you were feeling or thinking until they created that space for it to come up, or they asked the right question. So that's the ministry of presence. We carry the Holy Spirit with us when we enter the room because we are God's beloved children. We're children of a king who has sent Jesus to have his spirit live in us. So we enter a room, any situation, and God's presence comes with us into that situation. God's presence is all that is needed. It's not helpful ideas and strategies. It's not advice. While sometimes those are appropriate, many times it's simply being with someone in pain that is all that is needed. and know that you are not the one who's bringing God's presence into the room, because God's presence is already there. You're showing up with the Holy Spirit to offer what you can. This is a neat quote I found from Henry Covert, who's a police officer and a prison chaplain. And he was talking about Jesus' ministry of presence. He said, Jesus noticed, he sought out those in need, he stopped, he was horrified, he was angry, he loved widely, yet personally. He healed relevantly, he crossed lines, he healed as a servant. And I think that's what it's about when we're listening. We're actually building bridges to others. We're crossing from our world and our experience into theirs. And we're living in their story. But it takes curiosity to do that. And sometimes when we're in tough situations or ones that are charged with emotion, it's easy to get judgmental or self-protective and defensive. We all do that. But to be able to sort of be present, I think of Jesus walking into all those places of conflict and still being able to be present to the people that were there, still offering them exactly what they needed. And that's who we follow into this. I want to tell you a quick thing, then we're going to try a fun exercise, okay? Are you with me? I want to just tell you one more piece of fact you need to know. When it comes to listening, I love these stats. Only 7% of what you're picking up right now from me is based on the actual words you're hearing. 7%. 55% comes from my body language, from my gestures, from my eye contact with you or looking down at my notes, from my posture, how I'm seated, how I'm interacting. And that might be even clearer to you if we were actually physically in the same room. You'd pick up more cues than you're getting through the Zoom screen. But 38% of the content is coming through the tone of my voice, the volume, the speed, and intensity. 7% of what you're hearing from me are the words. Isn't that wild? So with that in mind, I want to give you a chance to do something sort of fun, sort of a little strange, but I hope you're going to have fun with it. It's playful, okay? So that's the category. I have a feeling you will laugh, and that's a good thing. What I want you to do is spend a moment just thinking about a situation, maybe in the last week, that you recognized you were feeling scared, frustrated, or angry. Okay, just think for a moment, scared, frustrated, or angry. And I know there could be some that are doozies. I'm asking you to pick one that's like, I could share this with someone I don't know. That kind of a story, okay? Put aside the other couple that came to mind. Now, I'm talking about someone cut you off in traffic, or you may not be driving much these days. Maybe you had to walk outside to your car alone and you got nervous in the dark. Maybe you were trying to